In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about Android permissions and set up the permissions for our Android app in the manifest file. Permissions are the things that an app is allowed to do. This includes things like accessing the camera, accessing the device location, or reading the contact details. On this slide, for example, I've pulled up the permissions of the Twitter app. And you can see that the permissions for this app are actually fairly comprehensive. I wasn't even able to capture all of them on a single screen. All of an app's permissions are set in one place, namely the Android manifest file. Let's open that now. Remember, the Android manifest XML file is like the boss of the app. The Android manifest is the file that needs to tell the Google Play Store, as well as the Android operating system, what our app is about and what permissions it has. We're going to specify two permissions in the Klima app. First, we'll add the permission to access the internet. And the way you do that is you type the open angle bracket and then start typing uses. At this point, you select uses permission from the Android Studio autocomplete, hit tab, and then all you have to do is start typing int, and then you can already select internet to insert all that verbose code for you. Just remember, with XML, you have to close the tag at the end. The second permission that we'll add is accessing the device location. This tutorial will in fact give you a choice to use either the find location or the course location. If you're working with a physical device, you can request the permission for the device's course or approximate location. This means that the app will gather location information from the network provider's cell towers as well as Wi-Fi networks. Course location is definitely good enough to provide weather information to the user. However, if you want to request the precise location via the GPS, then you have to specify the access find location in the Android manifest instead. For this tutorial, I'll be working with the Android emulator where I can share my screen with you guys quite easily. However, one limitation of the emulator is that it cannot access location data from cell towers since it's a virtual device. So I will be adding the access find location permission here and then spoofing some GPS data. Now that we've added our permissions to the Android manifest file, let's take a step back and discuss what permissions are and why permissions matter. You see, all Android applications share resources and data, and no application by default has permission to perform actions that would either adversely impact other applications, the operating system, or the user. And these include things like accessing the internet, reading the user's private data like their contacts, keeping the device awake, and so on. All apps must explicitly declare the permissions that they need for these capabilities in the Android manifest with the uses permission tag. On older versions of Android, prior to Android Marshmallow, users were prompted for consent at the point where they installed the app. If you've been using Android for a while, you might remember agreeing to prompts just like this when downloading an app. To install and use this colorful calculator, for example, we first have to agree to let that app read all the device's external storage. Now it turns out that not many people read these prompts carefully or really just wanted to try out the app, so everybody just clicked accept by default and went ahead with the installation. Now I'm sure you can see that there are many problems with this way of doing things. For starters, the permissions were granted in perpetuity. In other words, people agreed to the permissions at the point of installation, and then the app had these permissions forevermore. Also, permissions were kind of all or nothing, right? If you wanted to install the app, you had to agree to give it all the permissions that it requested, as opposed to being able to pick and choose. All these factors combined resulted in systematic abuse of Android permissions. Let me show you another calculator app. Check this out. So here's a calculator app that for some reason wants to be able to access our contacts, wants to access our call logs, wants to access our location and our device ID, and much, much more, yeah? So of course, seeing this, I immediately install the app, right? Now this is a particularly bad example, but the sad truth of the matter is that apps like this from unscrupulous app developers proliferated on the Android store purely to mine and monetize user data. Now Google eventually woke up when they saw this train wreck and tried to address the issue with Android Marshmallow. Since Android Marshmallow or API 23 and above, permissions are handled differently. Instead of granting an app permission upon app installation, permissions are only requested as and when the app actually needs them. In other words, the app must get the user consent while it is attempting to do something it needs permission for. So permissions are requested and granted at runtime. This means it's a little more complicated for us as developers to code this up because we're going to have to add some Java code to handle these permission requests. But it empowers users and will mean less data is stolen in the future without their consent.